My name is Camille Ashworth. I'm 33, and I'm a regional operations consultant for a national franchise support network based out of Denver, Colorado, which means I've spent the last 8 years reading corporate ownership filings the way most people read a grocery list. Blamed by my own sister for abandoning our mother's business during its hardest years, I sat at a family dinner 4 months ago and listened to her tell 20 relatives a version of events that simply wasn't true. Right up until the franchise corporate office itself sent her an email, forwarded by accident to the whole family group chat, listing my name on every single ownership filing for the past 6 years. Camille just disappeared the second things got hard, my sister had said, refilling her wine glass. I was the one who actually kept this place alive. If you're watching this, comment where you're from and what time it is right now for you. And hit subscribe, because this one's worth staying for. Let me take you back to where this actually started. My mother, Diane Ashworth, opened a small breakfast and lunch franchise location in Lakewood, Colorado, in 2011. A modest operation that never made her wealthy, but gave her a real sense of purpose after my parents' divorce. My older sister, Renee, worked front of house there through high school and college, charming with customers in the way that made my mother glow with pride at every family gathering. I worked the back office from the time I was 17, learning the unglamorous parts nobody found impressive. Payroll, franchise compliance paperwork, tax filings, the actual bones holding the place together. The trigger came when I was 25, 3 years after I'd finished my business degree and taken a corporate job in Denver, 40 minutes from the restaurant. My mother asked me to formally co-sign the franchise's next 5-year renewal agreement as a listed operating partner, alongside a request that I contribute $40,000 of my own savings toward a required equipment upgrade the franchisor demanded. I said no to the cash contribution specifically. I simply didn't have $40,000 sitting available at 25, but I offered instead to continue handling the compliance paperwork and ownership filings remotely, unpaid, which I'd already been quietly doing for 2 years by that point. My mother accepted that offer gratefully at the time. Renee, however, framed it differently to the rest of the family from that point forward, repeating at every gathering some version of the story that I'd refused to really invest in mom's business and had checked out once my own career got comfortable. I never corrected her loudly, partly out of exhaustion, partly because I assumed the actual paperwork would eventually speak for itself, an assumption that turned out to be more accurate than I expected. For 6 years, I kept doing that quiet, unglamorous work. Every quarterly compliance filing, every franchise renewal document, every ownership disclosure required by the franchisor's corporate office, I handled all of it remotely, unpaid, listed formally as a 15% minority operating partner on every single filing, a detail Renee either didn't know or chose never to mention. My mother knew, of course, but had grown, over the years, increasingly non-confrontational about correcting Renee's version of events, largely to keep peace in a family that had already survived one difficult divorce. The only real acknowledgement I got during those 6 years was my mother occasionally texting, late at night after closing, "Thank you for handling the paperwork again. Don't know what I'd do without you." Messages I saved, quietly, in a folder I never showed anyone. Then, for months ago, the franchisor's corporate office announced a company-wide ownership audit ahead of a planned regional expansion, requiring every location to formally reconfirm all listed partners. Renee, apparently unaware of the filing history, had told the corporate representative handling our location's audit that she was the sole operating partner, an assertion the representative's records immediately contradicted. The corporate office sent a clarification email to our mother's business account, CCING all listed partners of record, which included me, asking Renee to formally explain the discrepancy between her claim and 6 years of filings listing Camille Ashworth as a 15% partner. My mother, distracted and not thinking clearly, accidentally forwarded that entire email chain to our family group chat instead of replying privately, apparently intending to ask Renee about it directly first. I read it in real time, sitting in my apartment in Denver, feeling something settle into place that I'd been quietly waiting 6 years to see happen on its own. The next family dinner happened to be already scheduled for that same week, my mother's 60th birthday, held at Renee's house in Golden, 20 relatives gathered around a long table covered in the kind of elaborate spread that Renee always insisted on for appearances. Renee, apparently not having connected the email dots yet, launched into her familiar refrain partway through dinner, prompted by a cousin asking innocently how the restaurant was doing. "It's been a lot of work keeping it alive," Renee said, refilling her wine glass. "Camille just disappeared the second things got hard, financially. I was the one who actually kept this place running. I felt the familiar urge to simply let it go, the way I had for 6 years. Instead, I said calmly, 'That's interesting, because the franchise office's own audit this week says otherwise.'" Renee laughed a little too quickly. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and read the email aloud, plainly, without embellishment. The corporate audit findings, my name on 6 years of ownership filings, the direct request for Renee to explain why she told the auditor something the paperwork didn't support. The table went quiet in that particular way a room goes quiet when a comfortable story suddenly stops holding together. Renee's face did something I'd waited 6 years to see. A flash of genuine panic before she caught herself. "That's just paperwork stuff. That's not the same as actually being here," she said, her voice tightening. "It's exactly the same as actually being here," I said. "I signed every renewal. I filed every disclosure. I've been a 15% partner on paper for 6 years because Mom needed someone handling that side of things, and you were never interested in learning it. That's not disappearing. That's just a different kind of showing up than the kind that gets noticed at a dinner table." My mother, seated at the head of the table, went very still and then quietly said, "She's right, Renee. I should have said something years ago instead of letting you believe what was easier." Renee's composure cracked fully then, tears springing up, genuine rather than performed, the specific vulnerability of someone realizing the story they told themselves for years wasn't the one that actually happened. "I didn't know," she said. "I really thought I was the only one holding this together." I softened slightly in that moment because I understood something true underneath her anger. Renee genuinely believed her own narrative, which made it worse in some ways, not better, but also more forgivable than deliberate cruelty would have been. "You were holding together the part people could see," I said. "I was holding together the part that keeps the whole thing legally allowed to exist. Both mattered. I just got tired of only one of us getting credit for it." I want to add something here I didn't fully appreciate until much later, which is how much this same pattern had shaped nearly every part of my adult life, not just the restaurant. I'd gotten used to being the reliable, invisible infrastructure in every relationship I was part of. The friend who remembered everyone's birthdays, but rarely got remembered on her own. The coworker who caught the errors nobody else bothered checking for. Sitting at that birthday table, watching Renee's version of our shared history finally buckle under its own weight, I realized I'd spent years assuming that being quietly essential was its own kind of reward, when really it had just been a comfortable excuse for everyone else not to look closer. The corporate audit ultimately resolved cleanly. My ownership stake formally reconfirmed, Renee's misstatement corrected without any real consequence beyond the conversation it forced. My mother, in the weeks following, began correcting the family narrative herself, unprompted, mentioning my compliance work at gatherings the way she'd always mentioned Renee's customer service charm. Renee and I are speaking again, more honestly than we have in years. Though I don't think either of us has fully forgiven the other for 6 years of an imbalanced story neither of us worked hard enough to correct earlier. Here's what I actually learned. Sitting at that birthday dinner and watching a corporate compliance email, do the work 6 years of quiet resentment never let me do myself. Showing up doesn't always look like the version people expect to applaud. Sometimes it looks like paperwork nobody thanks you for, filed correctly, year after year, waiting patiently for someone else's audit to finally say what you'd been too tired to keep repeating yourself. If this hit close to home, tell me in the comments about the unglamorous way you've shown up for your own family, the kind nobody claps for. Subscribe if you want to see how these stories keep unfolding. Share it with someone who's ever done the quiet work nobody noticed, and I'll see you in the next one.